Thank you, Doug, for that reading. So we're talking today about money. I know that's not a very British thing to do. In some parts of the world, it's perfectly acceptable to talk about money. So if you're British, then try to put aside your sort of qualms about thinking about money. And if you're not British, then pray for those of us who are as we go through this. And we're talking specifically about giving money. But don't worry, I'm not going to finish with some emotional appeal with schmaltzy music in the background, sort of putting emotional pressure on you to give and so on. And if this is your first time here, please don't think that we always talk about money and we're always after people's money. That's not us at all. In fact, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be giving money away. So come back in 2 weeks' time if you want to experience that. We're going to be giving money away in 2 weeks' time, not asking for money. Now, why are we talking about giving money? Those of you who are regulars here will know that we're currently raising money for our Restore and Renew building project. And the point of Restore and Renew isn't, of course, that we land up with lovely buildings for us. The point is so that we have much better facilities in which to do mission and ministry and reach out to our wider community and serve our wider community. That's the point of Restore and Renew. And also to significantly bless our earth by significantly reducing our carbon footprint year on year. And members of our church council have already given £61,000 to sort of kickstart the building fund. I know one or two other people have given already as well, and we're starting the fundraising. We've got a gift day next week, and we're going to be asking people to come and to bring their gifts next week if they're able to. And so we're taking this opportunity in the life of our church to look at 2 chapters in the New Testament, the longest teaching in the New Testament about Christian giving. And of course, it's relevant not just to Restore and Renew, but it's relevant to any Christian giving. Whether we're giving tins and so on to the Basics Bank, which we do, we have the trolley there week by week. We're always wanting people to put more in there. Or giving to other Christian organizations. We're going to have a special appeal in a month or so's time for a Christian mission charity. But, and this is a big but, I want you to hear this properly. We're not even primarily talking about giving money because of Restore and Renew. No, Jesus knows that we often think about money. He knows that we're often anxious about money, and so he often talked about money, because he wants us to know his peace when it comes to money, and to be able to live by his principles when it comes to money as well. He wants to help us handle our finances. And so even if we didn't have a building project, we would still be talking at some point about Christian giving. Grace and Tim said earlier, I submit to Christ as Lord. And part of submitting to Christ as Lord it's submitting every area of our lives to God, isn't it? Including our finances and the way we handle our finances. So that's the real reason why we're talking about giving money this morning. It's to help us follow Jesus with every part of our lives. Now, I want to say that giving is good for us. And when I put that on the screen, maybe some of you think, yeah, right. If I give something to charity, I'm not going to get that money back, am I? I've lost. How can it be good for us? If I volunteer for a charity or to help someone, I'm not going to get that time back, am I? I've lost that time forevermore. How can giving be good for us? Well, there's a book called The Paradox of Generosity that lists all sorts of studies showing that generous people receive back things that are even more valuable than they give. Think about it. If you give a gift to a child and you watch them unwrap it, what do you get? You get huge joy, don't you? As you see the delight on their faces and so on. And so you might not get the money back, but you get joy. And this book shows it's not just joy that we get when we give generously and regularly and so on. Generous people gain a sense of purpose and personal growth. People who give their time or money become physically healthier, emotionally healthier as you connect more deeply with other people and your network becomes wider and broader. You bring more energy to your work. You find other people want to help you out. And yes, it's counterintuitive, but people who give generously land up better off financially than those in the same boat who don't give generously. It's counterintuitive. But it all goes to show that what Jesus said is true. He said, give, and it will be given to you. He said it's more blessed to give than to receive. So giving is good for us in all sorts of ways. I don't know if you've seen the film Pay It Forward. It's a feel-good film about an 11-year-old boy who set a class project to transform the world. And he comes up with this idea called Pay It Forward. And so, if you do me a favor and I pay the favor back, then that's the end of the story, isn't it? But if you do me a favor and then I pay it forward, I pay it on to someone else, and they pay it on to someone else as well, then it just keeps on going. That's the boy's idea, to transform the world. And the film sort of teases out all the benefits that come not just to the recipient of the gift or the favor, but actually to the giver of the gift or the favor as well. And it's wonderfully illustrating what this book, The Paradox of Generosity, and what Jesus teaches is true. Give, and it will be given to you. And giving is good for us because we're made to give. Think about it. When you see something in a shop that you know someone you love would really like, you instinctively want to buy it for them. Or think about it when we see some sort of appeal and it touches our hearts. We want to give. Even if we're not able to, we want to be able to give. Giving is, we're made to give. And we're made to give because we're made by a God who gives. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. Gifts don't get much bigger than that, do they? He gave to us. And so we're made to give. And so actually, if you're not giving regularly, you are hurting yourself. And you're becoming less than the person God has made you to be. We need to give just as we need to eat. It's part of how we're wired. And so even if you wouldn't call yourself a Christian here this morning, I hope that you will give regularly. You don't have to give regularly to our church. You're welcome to if you want to. But find a charity that you're passionate about and give regularly because it's good for you. Now, week by week, we look at a chunk of the Bible, and so I'm going to look at this bit of the Bible that Doug has read to us just now. And let me just give a little bit of the background to the story. Because as we look at it, we're going to find out some tips on how we can give generously. And because giving generously is good for us. So the background is this. 2,000 years ago, there was a bit of famine in the area of the Middle East around Jerusalem. And so the people there were, getting very poor. And so the fledgling churches in other countries, in Greece and other areas, they heard about that and they wanted to respond. So they took up a collection so that they could give to the Christians in Jerusalem and near Jerusalem. Maybe it was the very first ever international aid effort. I suspect it may well have been. And if you think about it, it was a pretty harebrained idea that Paul, the Apostle Paul, who was writing these words in the letter, dreamt up because of the racial tensions involved. I mean, think about it. In the Middle East today, as it was 2,000 years ago, the Jewish people didn't always get on very well with those who weren't Jewish. And so why would a bunch of people who are Greek want to give to a bunch of people who are Jewish who they've never met? They haven't seen people on TV screens and so on. They haven't got social media to pick up the disaster that's going on. Why do they want to give? Well, it's because their hearts have been transformed by Jesus. And now they view these people who were sort of enemies, now they view them as brothers and sisters. And so they want to give. And here's how the Apostle Paul puts it in verses 13 and 14. He says, "Our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard-pressed, but that there might be equality. At the present time, your plenty will supply what they need, so that in turn their plenty will supply what you need. The goal is equality." So this wasn't just an act of famine relief. This was an act of racial harmony and equality. It was proof that their hearts were being transformed by Jesus. And this part of the letter that's talking about this collection shows two different sorts of giving. First, there's sacrificial giving that goes beyond our means. And that's what some of the churches north of Greece had done. Verse 2, in the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. They gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. So isn't that incredible? They were poor. They were incredibly poor. In fact, they were probably so poor that Paul hadn't even bothered to ask them to give money. He thought there's no point. So instead, when they heard about it, they pleaded to be able to give. They said, we want to give. Don't ignore us. We've got something to give, even out of our extreme poverty. They were so keen to give that they gave sacrificially more than they were able to. And sometimes God does prompt us to give sacrificially. I remember a few years ago, someone in the congregation telling me that they were going to have a much cheaper summer holiday than normal that year because they wanted to give substantially to a particular appeal that was running at the time. That was a sacrifice. Now, maybe you say, well, that's a sacrifice out of their wealth. But sometimes God calls us to make sacrifices out of our relative poverty. In fact, poorer people are often more likely to give a higher proportion of their income to others in need, simply because they've experienced for themselves what it's like to have next to nothing. They know how awful it is, and they don't want others to experience that. And so poorer people are often more generous. And why did the churches north of Greece give so sacrificially? Well, not just because they wanted to help their new brothers and sisters. It was also because they knew that God had given sacrificially to them. Verse 9, you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that you, through his poverty, might become rich. Someone once said that Jesus was born in a borrowed stable, preached in a borrowed boat, rode into Jerusalem on a borrowed donkey, ate his last meal in a borrowed upper room, and was buried in a borrowed tomb. He became poor, so that we might become rich. And Jesus never asks us to do anything that he hasn't already done for us. And so when God asks us to give sacrificially, it's because he has already given sacrificially to us. Andrea and I don't own our own house. We've got some savings that we hope will one day go towards a deposit on a house. But we've given some of that deposit to Restore and Renew, trusting that God will bless us with the money that we need for a deposit when it's time to do that. The second sort of giving that Paul talks about is proportional giving, which is sort of according to our means, not beyond our means, but according to our means. In fact, that's what he's encouraging the church in Corinth, who were the first recipients of this letter, to do. So verse 10, he says, last year you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it, according to your means. In other words, they've already given some money last year. Now it's time for them to give some more because the famine is still going on. But it depends on how much they've got. He wasn't asking them to give beyond their means. He was asking them to give according to their means. If they had a lot, give a lot. If they had a little, give a little. And there are some people here who have very little disposable income. It's easy to think, well, my gift won't make any difference. It's not worth giving anything. And that might be true, or almost true, with sort of normal human accounting. But it is not true with God's kingdom accounting. His kingdom works on different principles. And so he says at verse 12, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. In other words, don't look at other people in their much bigger homes and think, oh, they're able to give far more than me. It's not worth me giving anything. No, don't look at them. Look at what you do have and give from that. Because that gift is going to be worth far more to God than maybe some of the larger gifts that other people give. Think of the widow that Jesus saw, the poor widow that Jesus saw, putting 2 small copper coins into the temple offering box. And he said, she has given more than all the others who'd put in loads of coins. She's given more than them because she gave out of her poverty all that she had to live on, whereas the others gave out of their wealth. So in God's kingdom accounting, your £2 gift may be worth far more to God than someone else's £20,000 gift. There'll be others here who aren't able to give as much as they want to, maybe because you're having to fund care for elderly parents at the moment, or because you're married to someone who doesn't share your faith and your values and your convictions and so on. Again, God doesn't want you to feel bad about that. He says, look, if the willingness is there, the gift is acceptable according to what one has, not according to what one does not have. Last week, Lena spoke about her and David's journey with tithing, giving 10% of their income to God. That's proportional giving. And for some people, that sort of level is something to work towards. For other people, that's a foundation to build on and build up from. The New Testament never specifies 10% as a figure to give, but it does commend this proportional giving idea. So here's how Paul had put it in his previous letter to the church in Corinth. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income. Do you see how that's to be proportional giving? And do you see that it's to be regular? Not just a sort of one-off gift, but a regular gift. So if you're not yet giving regularly, please, it'll be good for you. Get into the habit of giving regularly. And notice that he encouraged them to give on the first day of every week. In other words, they got paid at the end of the week. Their priority with their money on the first day of the next week is to give to God and then to live the rest of the week within their means. I remember a preacher once saying, don't give God what's left. Give him what's best. In other words, don't give at the end of the week or the end of the month when you just see how much money is left in the bank balance. Give at the beginning of the week or the month and then live the rest of the week or the month accordingly. And that's what Andrew and I do. Most of our own giving goes out on the first day of the month, just to make sure that it's our priority. But living according to our means doesn't necessarily mean we spend more money on ourselves than as we get richer. Take John Wesley as an example. He was one of the great Christian leaders of the 18th century. When he was 28, he began to limit his expenses so that he would have more money to give to the poor. So he found that he could, in the first year he was doing this, he earned £30, and he found that he could live on £28. And so he gave £2 to the poor. The next year, his income doubled to £60, but he carried on living on £28. And so he was able to give away just over half his income. And then the next year, his income went up to £90. And again, he carried on living on 28, and he was able to give away 2/3 of his income. And at one point in his life, his income went up as high as £1,400 in a year, but he rarely spent more than £30. And the tax commissioners of the day were so confused by this, they thought he must be cheating. And so they investigated him. They thought he was committing fraud of some sort. But no, he was just giving away the vast majority of his earnings. When he died, aged 87, the only money mentioned in his will were the coins in his pocket and in his dresser. And he'd given away the best part of £30,000. He gave according to his means. 2 other quick things just to note from this passage. Don't give because you feel you ought to give. Give because you want to give. Sometimes we receive a begging letter or we see someone on the street begging and we think, well, we ought to give. But Paul talks in this repeatedly about the willingness to give. They want to give. And so whatever it is that you're giving to, give from your heart. If the Lord has put it on your heart, give to it. And for the Christian, as our hearts are transformed by Jesus, some of what we want to give to is going to be his kingdom purposes and kingdom growth, whether in this country or around the world, as well as helping those who are less fortunate than us. So give because you want to give, not because you feel you ought to give. And finally, do actually give. I was quite amused by this. Paul writes, last year you were the first not only to give, but also to have the desire to do so. Now finish the work, so that your eager willingness to do it may be matched by your completion of it. So they'd started, but they hadn't finished. And so Paul gives them a gentle nudge. They had been procrastinating. And I say I was quite amused by this. I was then quite convicted by this, because I listened to a sermon a few months ago where the preacher, he was talking about giving, and he made a suggestion. He said, look, if you've got a child or a grandchild who's off at university somewhere and really benefiting from the ministry of a local church where they're at university, then you as the adult should give to that church in a different part of the country or world. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. Yes, because, the students aren't going to have much money to be able to give. But I'm grateful for that church, so I should be giving to that church as well as to my own local church. And I thought, that's a good idea. And I did nothing about it. So I felt very convicted by this. And as I was writing this sermon, I set up a standing order to that church in London where Josh is, because I'm grateful for what they're doing for him. It's not as much as we give here, but it's a token of our appreciation. So, there's quite a lot in this passage. That's a quick summary. Giving is good for us because we're made to give. There's sacrificial giving, which God sometimes calls us to, which is beyond our means. There's proportional giving in line with our means. There's the encouragement to give regularly and to give at the beginning of the week or month, to make it clear it's a priority for us. There's making sure we're giving because we want to, not because we feel we ought to. And there's actually getting on and giving, not just intending to give. So let's just be quiet for a moment, and you can look through those points on the screen and think, well, maybe there's one in particular which is standing out to me as God's message to me this morning. And Lord Jesus, thank you that you have given so much for us. Would you help us in our own small way to pay it forward to others less fortunate than us, to your kingdom building purposes, to other charities? Would you help us to trust that you know what's best for us, and that when you say giving is good for us, that we would receive that blessing as we learn to give to others. And Lord, as we each think about our own attitude to giving and to charity, would you lay on our hearts what it is you want us to do? Whether that's giving to restore and renew or giving to something else, whether it's giving sacrificially or giving within our means, whatever it is, would you lay it on our hearts, and would you give us the courage to do that in faith, knowing that you love us and have good plans for us. So we pray in your precious name. Amen.